Good morning, Vietnam. I'm back and I decided my next YouTube will be on the podcaster, the vlogger, Dr. Mike. I am a fan of Dr. Mike. I've watched a number of his videos and then I watched him in his last boxing match. I was very, very impressed. It takes a lot of courage, guts, and a lot of training to get in a ring and fight like that. I took up boxing 5 months ago and really enjoying it tremendously. That and doing more and more calisthenics, which is also part of the boxing program, my whole body has changed and I'm feeling a lot better in every way. But then I saw him do an interview with Harry Jowsey, the other Australia influencer. I was extremely disappointed on how that interview went. But that's going to be a little later. First, I want to talk about his podcast with Dr. Gundry, who has a lot of issues himself about being a bit way too sensationalist in the things he says. The beginning of that interview, that discussion, was also with a Dr. Daniel Bellardo. I think she was put in this interview because she is also an expert in nutrition, whereas Dr. Mike is not. And again, a few times he butted in and talked about nutrition, but you can tell immediately he's not an expert. At the beginning of that interview, a discussion, he lambasted Dr. Gundry for not being a professional, for making statements that were so outlandish, and to have responsibility for what he says on the internet. But all that criticism, in my opinion, is all about you, Mike. I'm sorry. You are not an expert on so many fields that you talk about. Neither am I, but I don't claim to be. I don't talk like I am. Even though this is only my 4th podcast. One of the things that Dr. Gundry says is the benefits of nicotine. And you and Miss Bellardo jumped on him. Cigarettes are really bad. There's so much data. But he didn't say that. He said there are benefits for nicotine. So I looked it up. And there are many benefits for nicotine, from nicotine. Another thing Gundry says, you could have explored that further. But oh no, he shut it down. Then there was the issue with Gundry with apples. Dr. Gundry, you're a bit nuts. I'm sorry. I've been eating apples my whole life. I'm 72. 65 years ago, when we moved to Australia in 1956, my maths is off, we used to go, because we're hillbillies, born and raised in the mountains of northern Greece, we used to buy food, not by the pound or kilo, we used to buy food in wooden crates. If it was full of apples, it would have weighed about 10 pounds at least 5 kilos. And the apples were quite small. We never bought large apples. Okay, of course the seeds. You can't eat the seeds in apples. Who eats the seeds in apples? I have eaten the seeds in apples. I'm not dead, obviously. The benefits of nicotine. Just looked at my notes again. The production of adrenaline, dopamine, and also helps in fat burning. But it has to be totally controlled. Smoking cigarettes, yeah, you get nicotine, but smoking cigarettes, as we have found, kills you. I knew that back in the late 60s, 1970. Fruit juice. I've always been totally against it. It makes no sense. You can juice 10 apples and drink it all, but you can't eat 10 apples. It just feels uncomfortable. You eat 1, 2 apples, maybe, and that's it. And as Dr. Bilardo says, you should juice them, but you should have smoothies. Sorry, I don't agree. Eating an apple is the whole product. As she says, it's the fiber. And when you when you make a smoothie, you keep the fiber. And the fiber is absolutely critical. I eat a ton of fiber every day in almost all my foods. 0 processed foods. About the only thing, no, I was going to say spaghetti, but that's made from whole wheat. It's just made from wheat into long strands of wheat. 0 processed foods. And almost 0 chemicals in my food. It's impossible these days, but I try by buying as much organic food as possible. Meat. Yeah, meat. I eat meat maybe every 3 months. I've been a vegetarian for 48 years. 90 to 95% every year, I would say I'm vegetarian. If I was living alone, I'm closer to 100%. But since I've been married a couple of times, had some live-in girlfriends, I'm not as strict, but pretty strict, at least 90%. So going back to some points, Dr. Gundry is correct. You should always try to eat food in season. But one of the things is that I live in the tropics now, in Vietnam. You can grow anything here all year round. The key is what I tried to do. There is slight seasonal variations in foods here, fruits. And I buy some fruit, or half and half in the stores here and the other half on the streets. The street guys that sell fruit only sell the fruit that's in season. So I do try to eat seasonal fruit. The other thing you and Dr. Bilardo failed, in my opinion, to do, you talked about the blue zones to some degree, but nowhere near enough. I've done my research on the blue zones, and I'm going to do a podcast on those, and also do a comparison of my diet, and also an estimate of the diet that my village in northern Greece consumes, and everyone in the village more or less lives into their 80s, some in their 90s, some to be 100. My auntie on my father's side passed away a few years ago at 101. My auntie on my mother's side, or rather, yes, she is 90. So I have the genes. I work out for an hour and a half, 3 times a week in the boxing gym. I do some running in between. I expect to live well into my 80s, and who knows, 90s as well. But what you guys didn't talk about was that Dr. Gundry lives, or has lived quite some time, in Loma Linda. It's one of the blue zones. And you could have really explored the foods in much more detail. One of the things I recall, I think it was he said that they get 50% of their fat from cheese. Well, what type of cheese? Where does the cheese come from? Where does the milk come from? Etc., etc. But it just didn't. You guys, especially you, Dr. Mike, since you were the moderator, didn't get into any of this stuff.